forced to marry the enemy. What he did after the yes shocked everyone. Mist hung thick over the valley, curling like pale fingers around the towers of the royal castle. The sun was hidden behind clouds that seemed to weigh heavier with each passing hour. Inside the great hall, torches flickered, casting dancing shadows across the marble floors. Today, the kingdom of Valeria would witness a union unlike any before. A marriage not born of love, but of necessity. Princess Alara stood near the grand windows, her hands clasped tightly before her. Her eyes, stormy like the skies outside, stared at the distant hills where the enemy kingdom of Draelmore lay. A part of her rebelled at the thought of marriage to Lord Kael, heir of a family her own had battled for generations. He was rumored to be cruel, cold, and cunning, a man whose name alone could make soldiers tremble. And yet here she was, dressed in a gown of silver and midnight blue, standing poised before a court that held its breath. The royal council had made the decision swiftly, without considering her heart. War had been dragging the kingdoms into ruin for decades, and this marriage was the only way to secure peace. Alara had wanted to argue, to refuse, to run, anything but agree. But the weight of responsibility pressed down harder than any blade. She turned as her handmaid stepped forward, whispering, "Your Highness, the guests have arrived." "The enemy heir is here." Alara swallowed, steadying herself. Her pulse quickened. Kael! The name was enough to make her jaw tighten. She had seen him once at the border skirmishes and remembered a man who smiled like a shadow and spoke with the charm of a predator, yet she could not deny the curiosity that flickered inside her. Who was he beneath the mask of his reputation? The doors of the hall opened with a deep creak, and every eye turned toward the entrance. There he was, tall, commanding, with dark hair brushing the collar of his coat. His eyes, a striking shade of gray, scanned the hall with an intensity that made whispers fall silent. Kael was not smiling, yet he carried an aura of power that drew attention like a flame draws moths. He stopped a few steps from the dais where Alara stood, and the air seemed to still. Even the courtiers, trained to hide their reactions, could not ignore the tension that crackled between the two young royals. "Princess Alara," Kael said, his voice low but clear, carrying over the murmurs of the room. "It seems the fates have finally brought us together." Alara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with a calm she did not feel. "It seems they have," she replied, though her heart hammered against her ribs. There was something unsettlingly powerful in the way he spoke, something that made her skin prickle. The high priest approached, carrying a ceremonial scroll and a golden ring set with a strange, dark stone. He began the ritual, his words echoing in the vast hall. Alara repeated each phrase, though her thoughts were elsewhere, tangled with doubts, fears, and a flicker of unwanted curiosity about Kael. When the moment came to say her yes, she felt every eye in the room on her. Her heart raced, every instinct screaming that she was walking into danger. But duty demanded her voice. She whispered almost reluctantly, "Yes." The hall fell into shocked silence. Even the council members who had orchestrated this union could not hide their surprise, but it was Kael's reaction that would be remembered forever. Instead of a simple nod or a polite gesture, he stepped forward, bowed slightly, and lifted the ring. "Then I vow to protect you," he said, pressing the ring onto her finger. His gray eyes held hers, intense and unyielding, and for a moment it felt as if the world had narrowed to only the two of them. A shiver ran through Alara. The promise sounded almost gentle, yet the weight behind it hinted at storms she could not yet see. The court murmured in confusion. This was not the expected cold, calculated behavior of an enemy lord. But Kael did not seem to care what others thought. He only cared that she had agreed, that she was now bound to him. As the ceremony ended, Alara felt the strange, unsettling feeling of being watched, not just by the courtiers, but by something beyond them. She tried to shake it off, but the shadows in the corners of the hall seemed to linger longer than they should, flickering unnaturally in the torchlight. After the formalities, she was escorted to Kael's private chamber, where she would spend her first night in Draelmore's castle. The halls were vast and silent, lined with portraits of grim-faced ancestors who had ruled with iron hands. Elora could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, and she wondered if she could ever live up to the expectations of two kingdoms. Cale walked beside her, silent and steady. The air between them was thick with tension, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something unspoken that neither dared to name. Finally he spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper meant only for her. "You need not fear me, princess. I am not what the stories say." Elara looked at him sharply.
Then what are you, Lord Cale? A tyrant?
A hero? Or just a man hiding behind rumors? Perhaps a little of all three, but you will learn the truth soon enough. She frowned, uncertain whether to trust him. And yet, beneath her caution, a strange thread of curiosity tugged at her. Who was he really? Was he merely the enemy she had been taught to hate, or was there more hidden beneath that cold, commanding exterior? That night, in the quiet of her chamber, Elara could not sleep. She traced the ring on her finger, feeling the weight of Cale's promise. Outside, the wind howled through the towers, as if warning her of the storms to come. Shadows seemed to move across the walls, whispering secrets she could not understand. Her thoughts returned to Cale. How he had pressed the ring onto her finger, how his gaze had held hers longer than politeness demanded. She could not deny the stirrings of something unfamiliar, something dangerous in its intensity. She had vowed herself to the enemy, and already the lines between hatred and fascination blurred. Meanwhile, in the depths of the castle, Cale stood by a window in his own chamber. The moonlight caught his features, revealing a sharpness that mirrored the steel of his blade. But his eyes, dark and stormy, betrayed a flicker of unease. He had not expected her to say yes so quickly. There was a recklessness in her courage, a spark that both alarmed and intrigued him. He turned from the window, moving to a small desk cluttered with old tomes and scrolls. Among them lay a map marked with wards and sigils, protective measures against the curse that haunted his family. No one knew the full truth, not even the council. He had inherited more than a kingdom. He had inherited a shadow, a weight that could consume anyone who dared to love him completely. As he traced a finger along one of the marks, he whispered to himself, "May she be strong enough. May she survive what comes next." The castle slept uneasily that night, as if the stones themselves were holding their breath. Elara tossed beneath her silken sheets, Cale's presence lingering in her thoughts. Outside, the winds carried whispers through the battlements, hints of challenges yet to come, of choices that would test hearts and loyalties alike. By morning, the first true light of dawn revealed the valley below, mist still clinging to the hills. The kingdoms watched, waiting to see what this unlikely union would bring. Elara rose from her bed, determination setting in her chest. She would face Cale, the curse, and whatever storms awaited her with courage. She had no choice but to navigate this treacherous path, to survive and perhaps even to find her own power along the way. And Cale, watching from his own tower, felt the stirrings of something he had long suppressed. The princess was unlike any woman he had met. Fiery, unyielding, and perhaps the only one who could stand beside him without faltering. The thought was both terrifying and thrilling. As the day began, the castle seemed alive with tension. Every glance, every whispered word hinted at battles not yet fought, both in the world outside and within the hearts of two people forced together by fate. The storm was coming, and neither Elara nor Cale could turn away. The binding oath had been spoken. The first step on a dangerous path had been taken, and somewhere in the depths of the castle, shadows stirred with a life of their own. Watching, waiting. Elara pressed her hand to the ring, feeling the faint pulse of promise beneath her skin. She could not yet know what lay ahead, but one truth was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The court had expected obedience, the council had expected politics, but no one had expected the spark that flickered dangerously between the princess and the enemy lord. And Cale, beneath his mask of composure, knew the first move had been made. The game had begun, and the consequences would be far-reaching, far beyond anyone's imagination. Outside the window, The mist thickened, curling like a veil over the kingdom. It was a warning, a promise, a prelude. And inside, two hearts, bound by duty, fear, and something unnamed, prepared to face the storms that fate had set in motion. And the first spark of the impossible, dangerous, and forbidden bond had already ignited. The castle of Draelmore was a labyrinth of stone corridors, winding staircases, and shadowed halls that seemed alive with whispers. Princess Alara had spent her first night staring at the ceiling, the events of the previous day looping endlessly in her mind. Kale's gray eyes, intense and unreadable, haunted her thoughts, along with the feeling of the ring's cold weight on her finger. A reminder that her life had changed forever. She rose early, moving quietly through the chambers. The castle was vast, and the morning sun barely penetrated its walls. The servants avoided her gaze, murmuring behind gloved hands. Every glance seemed to measure her, judge her, as if they were waiting to see whether she would bend to her new life or break under it. Elara's first encounter with Kale that morning was in the High Gallery, where banners of Draelmore's ancestors hung like silent sentinels. He was standing by a window, watching the valley below, his posture rigid but not unkind. "You are up early," he said without turning. "I could say the same for you," she replied, trying to steady her voice. She hated the way her words trembled despite her best efforts. "I suppose kings and heirs do not sleep as common folk do." Kale's lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. "Some of us never sleep, princess. Not when the weight of a kingdom presses down on our shoulders." He finally turned to her, gray eyes meeting hers, sharp and unreadable. "And some of us carry burdens that no one can see." Alara hesitated, sensing the hidden depths in him. She wanted to believe him, even as caution whispered in her mind. "And what burden do you carry, Lord Kale?" she asked softly. He looked away, eyes tracing the distant horizon. "A curse," he admitted, almost as if speaking to himself. "A legacy of my bloodline, one that will follow me and anyone who dares to love me, until it is broken, or until it consumes us both." The word hung heavy between them. Elara's breath caught. A curse? Was it superstition, or something far more real? And yet, for the first time, she saw a vulnerability in Kale that no one else could see. He was not merely the enemy lord of stories. He was a man carrying a weight that seemed almost unbearable. The morning passed with stiff formality. Courtiers and advisors surrounded them, discussing alliances, trade, and border disputes. Alara listened, trying to focus on the duties thrust upon her, but her thoughts kept wandering back to Kale, to the quiet moments when he had seemed less like a predator and more like a man trapped by circumstance. By midday, Kale requested a private walk in the castle gardens, a terrace perched high above the cliffs, where winds tore cloaks and hair alike. Alara followed uncertain. She had not decided whether she could trust him, yet something in her drew her forward. The garden was a mixture of beauty and wildness. Ivy climbed the walls like frozen rivers, and flowers of deep crimson and violet swayed in the wind. The sky above was a canvas of gray, the clouds heavy and restless. Kale walked beside her silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low, almost reverent. "This marriage is not what I desired either," he said. "And yet, here we are, bound by duty and expectation." "Do not pretend you have no choice," she said, her voice steady despite the swirl of emotions within her. "You are feared, yes, but you could have refused. You chose this path as much as I did." Kyle shook his head slowly, a shadow passing over his face. "Choice is a luxury few of us have. I have lived under the eyes of my ancestors for 20 years, their expectations chaining me like armor. This marriage... perhaps it is the only way to change the course of our kingdoms. Perhaps it is the only chance to survive what is coming."
Alara felt a strange pull of empathy. She had never imagined the enemy could feel trapped or burdened.
And yet, the danger in his words was undeniable. Something was stirring, something older than either kingdom, waiting in the shadows. Their walk continued in silence, the wind carrying their unspoken thoughts. Then, Kale stopped near a fountain, its waters dark and still, reflecting the clouds above. He looked at her, and for the first time his expression softened, almost vulnerable. "Do not mistake me for a cruel man, princess," he said quietly.
I am bound by rules I did not create, but I will not harm you if you trust me.
"Not now, not ever." Elara's heart skipped, a mixture of fear and longing twisting inside her. She wanted to ask him why he had acted as he did at the ceremony, why he had pressed the ring onto her finger with such solemnity. But before words could form, the air shifted, as if the castle itself had exhaled.
A servant rushed toward them, breathless. "My lord!"
"Princess, there is trouble at the northern gate. Rebels, they are attempting to enter the castle." Kale's gray eyes darkened instantly.
"Stay here," he commanded, his voice sharp and unyielding. "I will handle this."
"I am coming with you," she said. "You will stay safe," he replied, but there was no anger in his tone, only concern. For the first time, Elara felt seen, as if her courage mattered to him. Moments later, they descended into the hallways, moving swiftly toward the northern gate. Shadows clung to the walls and the wind whispered through cracks in the stone, carrying the scent of distant fires. Kale's hand brushed hers briefly as they ran, a small contact, but enough to ignite a strange awareness in both of them. The northern gate was in chaos. Rebels had scaled the walls, faces twisted with anger, banners of both kingdoms torn and dirty. Kale moved with precision, commanding soldiers with a voice that brooked no disobedience. Elara followed, keeping close, trying to balance fear and curiosity. Amid the clash of steel and shouted commands, Elara saw Kale fight, not with recklessness but with control. Each movement was calculated, each strike purposeful. He was not merely the enemy lord of stories. He was a man of skill, a protector, a warrior carrying the weight of his ancestors' mistakes. And yet, in the heat of the moment, when Kale was surrounded by shadows of danger, his eyes found hers across the battlefield. A silent promise passed between them: survive and face what comes next together. By the time the battle ended, the rebels had been driven back, leaving scorched stone and broken banners in their wake. Kale's armor bore scratches and dents, but he was unharmed. Elara, her dress torn and hands scratched, felt a rush of adrenaline, and something deeper, something that left her breathless and uncertain. He approached her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered, and Elara felt a warmth where fear and fascination collided. "You are reckless," he said quietly, though his gray eyes held admiration rather than anger.
"I am not afraid of surviving,"
she replied, meeting his gaze steadily, "even if it means standing beside my enemy." Kale studied her, and for a long moment neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of smoke and stone, and the castle seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a flicker of a smile, he finally said, "Perhaps you are stronger than I imagined." The evening came, quiet and tense. Soldiers cleaned their weapons, courtiers whispered rumors, and the castle settled into a wary peace. Elara returned to her chambers exhausted yet restless. She traced the ring on her finger, feeling its cold pulse, and wondered if Kale's promise was enough to keep her safe from the shadow she had glimpsed today. She could not shake the feeling that danger lingered closer than they imagined. Within the castle, within the walls, and perhaps within the hearts of both kingdoms, Kale and his own quarters pored over ancient tomes and scrolls, searching for ways to suppress the curse that haunted him. Each mark, each ward carried a warning. The curse was patient, and those who dared to love him fully could fall into its darkness. He closed the book, resting his head in his hands. Elara's courage, her presence, had stirred something inside him he had not felt in years: hope, fear, and longing all at once. And yet, he knew that what lay ahead would test them both, in ways neither of them could yet imagine. That night, the wind howled through the castle, Carrying secrets and shadows alike, Elara lay awake, listening to the distant echoes of the battle, the weight of Kale's words, and the promise of something dangerous, irresistible, and forbidden that had already begun to pull at her heart. The morning air was sharp with the scent of pine and frost as Princess Elara rode along the cliff paths outside Drailmore's castle. Kale rode beside her, silent and steady, his eyes scanning the horizon. The sun had barely broken through the clouds, painting the valleys in muted gold and gray. Elara's heart still raced from yesterday's skirmish at the northern gate. Soldiers had been injured, banners torn, and yet the rebels had been repelled. Her own hands bore faint scratches from a fleeting clash, but it was the memory of Kale's calm presence during battle that lingered in her mind. He had moved with precision and control, protecting her even when the danger seemed overwhelming. "You do not speak much when we ride," Elara observed, her voice cutting through the cold wind. Kale's lips quirked slightly. "There is little to say when one must remain alert. The world is not safe, Princess. Especially now." Elara's gaze flicked to him. There was a quiet intensity in his expression, a weight she could feel pressing into the space between them. "And yet you face it without fear," she said softly. "Even after the curse you spoke of, do you not feel it in every step?" Kyle's jaw tightened. "The curse is always there, waiting, whispering. But I've learned to control it, to mask it. I cannot allow it to dictate my actions. Not now, not when so much depends on me." Elara's mind drifted. She imagined the nights he must spend alone, haunted by shadows she could not see, by a weight that was all his own. And in that thought, something inside her softened. She could not deny the pull she felt toward him, a mixture of fear, fascination, and something far more dangerous, a desire to know him, truly know him. They rode in silence for some time, the only sounds the soft thrum of hooves against the stone paths and the distant call of ravens. Then Kale stopped at the edge of a cliff overlooking a valley blanketed in mist. "This place," he said, his voice low, "has always been my sanctuary. When the curse threatens, when the world grows too heavy, I come here to think, to remember who I am beneath it all." Elara dismounted, her fingers brushing against the ring on her hand. She had grown accustomed to its weight, the subtle pulse beneath the cold metal reminding her that she was bound to Kale, and perhaps, in some way, to his fate as well. "You are burdened, Kale," she said quietly, stepping closer. "And yet you never show it. You bear it alone, and no one else can see the depth of your struggle." He looked at her then, and for the first time his gray eyes seemed to glimmer with something like vulnerability. "Do you wish to see it, Princess? To see what lies beneath the mask?" Elara hesitated. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and longing. I think I do," she admitted. Kale's expression softened just slightly, and he gestured toward the valley below. "Then watch and learn. But be warned, not all darkness is meant to be understood. Some things are meant to be endured." They spent the day walking through the valley, where the remnants of old magic lingered in the air like dust in sunlight. Strange flowers grew among rocks that seemed too jagged to host life, and small streams whispered as if carrying secrets from long ago. Elara could feel the pulse of the land, a quiet energy that mirrored the tension in Kale himself. As they walked, Kale began to share fragments of his past, stories of ancestors who had been cursed, of battles fought both in the world and within their own souls. Elara listened, fascinated and careful. Each word revealed a layer of him she had never anticipated. A man shaped by pain, bound by duty, and yet capable of deep compassion. When the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting the valley in a dusky glow, they found themselves at an ancient stone circle. Its standing stones were covered in moss, and faint runes glimmered where sunlight touched them. "This place is sacred," Kale said. "It holds the memory of those who sought to control the curse, to bind it. It is old magic, powerful enough to test even the strongest wills." Elara's eyes widened. "Do you use it?"
Kyle shook his head.
"I cannot! Not yet! The magic is unstable. and the consequences of failure are dire. He hesitated, then added softly, "But perhaps one day we may find a way together. If you are willing to face it by my side." Her heart thumped in response to his words. But I do not know if I am ready, she admitted. But I do not want to turn away, either. Not from this, not from you. Kale's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that sent warmth racing through her. He did not speak, but the intensity in his eyes said more than words ever could. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to only the two of them, their breaths, their heartbeats, the pulse of the land beneath their feet. Suddenly, a rustling came from the shadows of the stones. Both of them froze, hands instinctively moving closer to weapons, though neither wished to strike. From the darkness emerged a figure cloaked in black, eyes gleaming with intent. "Kale the stranger," hissed, voice low and venomous. "You cannot hide forever. The curse knows you are not alone, and it will consume you if you do not act." Kael's expression hardened. "You are not welcome here," he said, stepping protectively in front of Ilara. The figure laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "The princess is exactly why you will fall, Kael. She is untrained, unprepared, and yet you have drawn her into your fate. Do you not see? By loving her, you risk everything." Ilara's breath caught. She had always suspected the curse was dangerous, but hearing it spoken aloud, with the threat so tangible, made her blood run cold. Kale's eyes darkened, shadows flickering across his face. "I will not allow harm to come to her," he said, voice firm, unwavering. "If the curse wishes to touch her, it will have to go through me first." The stranger's eyes narrowed. "We shall see, Lord Kale. We shall see." And then, as suddenly as they appeared, the figure vanished into the mist, leaving only silence and the faint echo of warning. Ilara's hands trembled, though she tried to hide it. "The curse! It is real," she whispered. Kale's hand closed over hers, strong and reassuring. "It is. But so is hope. So is courage. And you, princess, you are braver than you realize." Her heart swelled at the words. She had begun to understand him, not as the enemy, not as the Lord of Draelmore, but as a man who carried burdens heavier than she had imagined. And for the first time she felt a flicker of trust, fragile, but undeniable. The walk back to the castle was quiet, both lost in thought. Ilara could feel the pull between them growing, subtle and irresistible, like the tide against the cliffs. She did not know how to name it. Fear, desire, curiosity, but it was there, undeniable and consuming. That night, the castle was silent again, but the shadows seemed closer, deeper, more alive. Alara lay awake, tracing the ring on her finger, the memory of Kale's hand brushing hers, the intensity of his gaze, the way he had spoken of hope and courage, all lingered like fire in her chest. And then in the darkness she heard it, a faint whisper almost carried by the wind. She could not understand the words, yet it felt as though the shadows themselves were warning her, testing her resolve, reminding her that danger was never far, and the curse waited patiently for its moment. Kale in his own chambers studied the scrolls that documented the ancient wards and protections of his bloodline. Each mark, each rune, carried the weight of generations. He knew the curse was patient, clever, and unrelenting. And yet, seeing Ilara today, her courage, her determination, stirred a resolve in him he had long thought lost. He would not allow her to fall. He would not allow the curse to take her. Not now, not ever. But deep in the forests that bordered the kingdoms, something ancient and unseen stirred, drawn to the bond forming between the princess and the enemy lord. The air shimmered, and the first whispers of dark power began to awaken. It would watch. It would wait. And when the time came, it would test the hearts of both Kale and Ilara in ways they could not yet imagine. The sky above Drellmore Castle was dark with storm clouds, swirling as if the heavens themselves were aware of the trials to come. The wind whipped through the battlements, carrying the scent of smoke and distant fires. Something ancient had awakened in the forest beyond the kingdom, drawn to the bond forming between Princess Alara and Lord Kale. It was patient, calculating and powerful, a darkness that would not be ignored. Alara stood on the terrace, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her silver-blue gown was torn at the hem from the earlier skirmishes, but she paid it no mind. Her thoughts were focused entirely on Kale, who had sent word for her to meet him at the edge of the eastern forest, where the first signs of the dark power had begun to manifest. She mounted her horse, heart thundering in her chest. Every instinct told her that danger waited, yet she could not turn away. Not now. Not when she had begun to understand Kale. Not when her feelings for him had grown into something far deeper than fear or fascination. Kale awaited her at the forest's edge, cloak billowing in the wind, sword sheathed but ready at his side. The storm made his gray eyes gleam with a strange intensity, as if reflecting the turmoil within both the world and himself.
"Princess," he said quietly, his voice carrying over the wind. "The darkness grows stronger."
"I have felt it in the wards, in the very air. If we are to survive, we must face it together." Alara dismounted, moving to stand beside him. "I will not leave you," she said firmly.
Not now. Not ever. Kale studied her for a long moment, a shadow of emotion flickering across his features. Relief, admiration, and something tender that he rarely allowed himself to show.
"Then we are ready," he said, his hand brushing hers briefly. The touch sent warmth through her chest, a small comfort against the cold dread that surrounded them. The forest ahead was thick and dark, the trees twisted as if shaped by the same ancient magic that had haunted Kale's family for generations. Shadows shifted between the trunks, moving unnaturally, testing their courage. Alara's grip tightened on the reins, her eyes scanning for movement. Suddenly the air pulsed with energy, and from the shadows emerged the first wave of the darkness, figures cloaked in shifting black, with eyes like embers. They advanced silently, yet their presence alone was enough to make the blood run cold. Kale stepped in front of Alara, drawing his sword. The weapon gleamed faintly, etched with runes that reflected his family's ancient wards. "Stay close," he instructed. "Do not let fear control you." Alara nodded, drawing her own dagger, small but sharp. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. She had faced danger before, but this was different. This was not men or soldiers. They were shadows of a power older than the kingdoms themselves. The first shadow lunged. Kale moved with precision, striking it with a force that sent ripples through the surrounding air. Alara followed his movements, striking with courage and growing skill. Together they moved as one, their bond strengthening with every clash, every whispered warning. Hours seemed to pass in the blur of battle. The darkness pressed, relentless, testing not only their physical strength but their resolve. Kale fought fiercely, yet his attention never wavered from Alara. She was not just his ally, she was his heart, the light he feared he might never deserve. At a sudden moment, one of the shadows broke through their defenses, advancing directly toward Alara. She froze, paralyzed by fear, but Kale reacted instantly, stepping between her and the threat. His sword met the shadow with a blinding flash of runes, sending it dissipating into smoke. "Do not let it control you," he said, gripping her hand tightly. "Focus on your courage, not your fear." Ilara's chest rose and fell rapidly, but she nodded. She could feel her own power growing, a quiet resilience she had not recognized in herself before. Together they faced the darkness, side by side, their trust and courage intertwining like threads of light in the shadows. Finally they reached the heart of the forest, a clearing where the air seemed to pulse with raw energy. In the center stood a stone altar etched with ancient runes that glowed faintly in the stormlight. The source of the darkness was here, a swirling mass of shadow and whispered voices, waiting, testing, challenging. Kale approached the altar cautiously, his sword held high. "The curse cannot exist without power," he murmured, "and it will not claim her while I still breathe." Elara stepped beside him, her hand brushing his. "Then we face it together," she said, voice steady despite the fear gripping her. Cale met her gaze, and for the first time he allowed himself to show vulnerability. "You are braver than anyone I have ever known," he whispered.
And I am proud and afraid all at once.
The shadows surged, lashing at them with cold tendrils of energy. Cale moved to intercept, but the darkness was cunning, twisting and striking in ways he had not anticipated. Elara felt the tendrils of fear brush against her, whispering doubt, but she focused on Cale's hand in hers, on the bond they had forged. Cale chanted softly, words of old magic flowing from his lips, while Elara repeated after him, her voice steadying with each syllable. The runes on the altar glowed brighter, responding to their shared intent. The darkness screamed, a sound like breaking glass and distant thunder, and then, with a final surge, it dissipated into nothingness. The forest fell silent, the storm clouds above parting slightly to reveal the first rays of sunlight. Cale lowered his sword, breathing heavily. "It is done, for now," he said, eyes scanning the clearing.
The curse is weakened, but not entirely gone. Its patience is eternal.
We must remain vigilant. Elara stood beside him, her hand still in his, and for a moment the world felt still, safe, and quiet. She had faced fear, faced the unknown, and stood unwavering beside the man she had once considered her enemy. Cale turned to her, his expression softening.
Elara, I cannot promise that the darkness will never return, but I can promise this. I will never let it take you.
"Not ever! You have my word!" Her chest tightened at the intensity of his gaze, the sincerity in his words. "And I will stand with you," she said, voice trembling but resolute. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." They embraced, a quiet moment of connection after the storm. Neither spoke for long minutes, letting the silence carry the weight of their shared trials, their growing bond, and the unspoken feelings that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally stepped back, the first light of dawn illuminated the clearing, casting golden hues across the trees and the altar. Cale took her hand again, more deliberately this time.
"We have survived much already," he said, "and yet our journey is only beginning. The kingdoms will not rest, and neither will the shadows. But I have hope now because of you." Elara felt tears prick her eyes, not of fear, but of understanding and connection. "I never expected this," she admitted, "to find someone I could trust so completely, even when he was my enemy."
Cale smiled faintly, the first true smile she had seen, warm and human. "Neither did I," he admitted. "Perhaps this is the beginning of something neither of us dared to imagine." They returned to the castle, walking side by side, their bond stronger, their trust unspoken but unbreakable. Courtiers and soldiers noticed the change in them, the quiet intensity between the princess and the enemy lord, and whispers spread through the halls. But neither cared. Their attention was on each other, and on the future they would face together. That night, in the quiet of her chamber, Elara traced the ring on her finger, feeling its cold pulse, now more like a heartbeat than a chain. Cale's words and presence lingered in her mind, a comfort and a promise. She understood, finally, that their union had never been just a political necessity. It had been a meeting of hearts, courage, and shared destiny. And Cale, standing in his tower, gazed out at the moonlit forests, thinking of Elara. The curse was not gone, but hope had returned, and with it the possibility of redemption, for himself, for her, and for the kingdoms. Outside, shadows still moved among the trees, patient and eternal. But now there was light between the princess and the enemy lord, a light that the darkness would find difficult to extinguish. For the first time, Cale allowed himself to imagine a future where fear did not rule, where love and trust could exist alongside duty and power. And for the first time, Elara allowed herself to believe that she could love him, not as the enemy, not as the prince of another kingdom, but as the man who had stood beside her in darkness and faced it with courage and honor.